Today I am interviewing Luke Smith. He has a YouTube channel with over 200,000 subscribers and also a website where he talks about pretty much everything from his experience in academia to philosophy and linguistics and minimalism, living below your means, and being truly free from the system, living on your own land, and just generally how to have real freedom in the modern age. And I started watching his videos when I wasn't even Orthodox. I was still Catholic. And I remember seeing him talk about Orthodoxy, and it just didn't register in my head like what it even was. And he has talked about Orthodoxy increasingly over the past few years. And so I'm really glad that we could finally collab, and I want to learn about your journey coming to Orthodoxy. So thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I guess it's been a long time coming, and in a way, it's a debut for me on the internet because I don't know. It's just we'll talk about it, but I haven't been on here in a while.
Yeah.
Kind of forget how it works. So,
Yeah,
thanks for having me on, and lots of the people at my parish actually. I told you this before,
mhm.
but like a lot of them, they're familiar with your channel, all this kind of stuff. A while back, you did a video on me, and
Yeah.
yeah, everyone's like, "Oh, Luke, you're on the internet," and I was like, "Yeah, I guess."
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
it's good to be
Awesome.
here.
Yeah. So my first question for you is, what was your upbringing like? Were you raised with any religion, have an atheist phase or anything like that?
Um, yes to both, I guess. So I grew up, I guess I would say normal American evangelical. You know, I went to a Southern Baptist church growing up. My parents both, were Southern Baptist. I don't know. There's kind of a bird's eye view I can give.
Hmm.
I don't know like how much detail people need to know, but like a lot of people in my teenage years, or really in the run up to that. Actually, let me start before that. Okay,
Okay.
let me just say
Yeah.
I know a lot of Orthodox people have this kind of tension between their origins. You know, they kind of look at all the things that growing up as heterodox, they, I was taught wrong on this or the
Hmm.
other. And there's part of that, but I think in general, I did get a good. I mean, my way of looking at it is, whenever you become Orthodox, you have a phase of being a catechumen where you have to learn what it actually is to be a Christian and what truly it means to overcome the passions and have faith and all this kind of stuff. And the way I look at it is my young life as a evangelical even was kind of like being a catechumen in the Orthodox faith. Now, my catechumenate was not ideal. You know, there are a lot of things. There's kind of poison pills in a lot of that kind of stuff. But when it comes down to it, as I return to the I guess faith, I don't necessarily look at that as a betrayal of my young life or my upbringing. If anything, it kind of perfected it.
Hmm.
It was all the good things I still get to keep. All the things that were kind of iffy, kind of questionable about the American
Hmm.
evangelicalism, those thankfully I can discard them.
Yeah.
And even as a child, there's some things you grow up with that you're kind of like, this is weird, but I guess this is how people do it.
Yeah.
So I don't look back at kind of well, I say I don't look back. I think there's a temptation to look at your upbringing with kind of critical lens,
Hmm.
but that's kind of being mad at your own sin in a way, right?
Yeah.
We're tempted to do that. Like I'm very tempted to be like, oh well, this is what I would have thought back then. I'm so foolish for thinking that, and I try not to think like that anymore,
Hmm.
or I try not to have that reaction because either way, in general, I had that. I went through a prolonged atheist phase. I feel like maybe in the course of the interview we can go into the details here, but
Yeah.
like because it's almost like if I were just to give you my biography, it would be there are too many twists and turns, and ultimately, it's not about me, right? Like
Yeah.
that's not. Um, some people will say, "Oh, that's something similar to me," but it's I don't know. Yeah,
Hmm.
we'll talk about that as we go on, I guess. But yeah, grew up an evangelical, went through an atheist phase for most of my adult life, in
Hmm.
which I had no interest in. I'm the kind of person I don't have a big. Some people are very spiritual. Let's say they
Hmm.
have like that kind of orientation, and that was less the way I was as a child. Like I was, it's a personality thing, I think as well. But somehow I found myself into the Orthodox Church, which is, quite a blessing, I guess. But
Hmm.
um, so
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So, when did you start to fall away from the faith? Was it in college? That's typical for most people.
It was before that. It was definitely a lot before that. I would say like my early teenage years. So when I was in middle school, I was very pious. I was trying to figure out the Bible, and I read a lot on my own. I remember the first day. It was like a Sunday. I read through Revelation. I was like, "This is wild. Whoa, there's some deep red pills in this, right?" And of course, that's a very dangerous. But in the Orthodox Church, most people probably know who are Orthodox, like the Book of Revelation is the one book you don't read in the liturgical cycle. It's a different book.
Yeah.
But in Protestantism, obviously, you grow up. There's this very democratic ideal, which is bad. Just to be clear, that a lot of Protestant people kind of have, and I had, where I can open up the Bible and kind of figure things out myself. And I didn't have the kind of authority to do that. But as a middle schooler, I was very kind of pious. And really almost to the point of and again, I'm not a very spiritual person. I didn't see spiritual things in every way, but I wanted to do things the right way. You know what I mean? I wanted to live a proper life. But as I kind of became a teenager, on one hand, there were issues going on kind of in the state. Let's say American evangelicalism, like politically and socially, has been unraveling for generations. And at this point, this was, around the time of like the Iraq War and stuff like that, where you have all this kind of, a lot of even demonic stuff that is in the mindset of evangelicals, where they're, really, which has caused so much harm to the Christians in the Middle East, the political Zionism and all this kind of stuff. Where Americans back, those of you who are a little younger, I don't, how old are you actually?
I'm 24.
Okay, so this might be before your era, but after September 11th, the mindset, there was this kind of excitement about being an evangelical, and we're gonna destroy Babylon, we're gonna invade Iraq and do all these great things, and the world is gonna be over in a couple years. There was the Left Behind series, and all that stuff is just, I look back at it, it's I can't believe I was ever a part of this. Not to say that there aren't very, pious people in it who, I don't want to say fell for it, but they're, that's just what you think the world is like. And one of the first kind of, I don't know, parts where I realized something was wrong is, ironically enough, looking at the situation in the Middle East, where, as I grew up, I started looking into what really is going on in the Iraq War, who's winning there, who's losing there. And of course, the Christian population of Iraq was devastated in the same way, the Christians in Palestine or Syria and all these places have gone through so much. And that's when I started to realize the simplistic worldview I was given, is that really accurate? Am I accidentally supporting evil people doing evil things in the world?
Yeah.
And that was one of the first things for me that was it's not a lack of belief, but at least the poison, as I said, growing up as an evangelical, sometimes there are good things about it, but there's a poison pill with it.
Yeah.
And I started to realize whatever truth is, I'm not getting the full truth,
Wow. And so did that lead to a sort of agnosticism where, this simplistic worldview that I was given, it's more complex, or did you become a militant atheist or anything like that?
I would say I gradually, as an individual, I started learning more about I guess the modern, there's not even a name for it, just the modern secular worldview. I got into evolution and things like this, not just as an explanation of things, but more as an ideology, as an explanation of how humans work, how the passions work, all this kind of stuff, which obviously the idea, not just in evolution, but really what science tries to do is it makes humans machines in a way. And you want humans to be machines. You want to reduce them to that because you can explain them, you can control them, you can, use them for your own purposes. And, I, as a young person, I guess I became very interested in that worldview. So and at the same time, when I said that evangelicalism was kind of imploding, that was happening even in the churches that I was in. So the church that I was in, I mean, it's a good example of kind of the naivete of that age, where I was in a church that I don't know, it was called, well, I'm not going to dox anything too much, but it was a small church that was on a hill with beautiful oak trees. And we decided we're going to move down to this other part of the county. It's one of the fastest growing zip codes in the whole country. We're going to move down there. We have enough money. We're going to build a big building, and we're going to start a church there. And it's going to be wonderful. And I think this is a period where everything was kind of going wrong. We're like, firstly, a lot of, I guess the background of the people in my church, they didn't know what they were getting into. And they ended up selling the old church. Some company bulldozed the hill and they built a Walmart where it used to be. So that actually, that's where I was baptized as a Baptist. Like it's now a Walmart. And I mentioned that not, for just as a funny anecdote, but like that was kind of what happened to this era of evangelicalism in suburban America. It kind of became, it really, like I think about the church I used to go. I said a little bit ago, there's a way in which being Orthodox has given me everything I used to have, all the good things I used to have as a Protestant, and that the things that were true, the things that were noble and right. And but like I can't really go back to the kind of church that existed in the early 90s, like a Baptist church. They just don't exist anymore. They're totally different. They're all slideshows and rock concerts and stuff like that. You can probably find some primitive Baptists that are doing different stuff, but that religion is gone. Like I can't go back to that if I wanted to, you know what I mean? And that's how it's been in that environment for every generation. Like, these people are still, Baptists or whatever, but the churches they go to are totally different from the churches their parents went to and the ones that their grandparents went to. Even though on an Excel spreadsheet of beliefs, they might believe mostly the same stuff. So either way, all that is to say, like, during that period, that world was unraveling, and my church, once they moved, they started losing people. They had this huge thing they had to pay off, and eventually they ended up selling. Years and years later, people just kind of stopped going. They couldn't make ends meet. They ended up selling it to a mega church. Actually, both the churches I grew up into were sold to mega churches, and they're just doing who knows what nowadays. Yeah. So either way, when I was in that environment, you kind of see the writing on the wall. You see your faith disappearing. And at the same time, you're faced by all these passions and temptations from the world. And those become very appealing. The ideology of, atheism and stuff like that became very appealing to me. And, I have friends like this whereas, my church is kind of passing away, and part of that is irrational. And part of it is not me trying to justify my atheism of that period, but that sets people up for a very difficult. It requires a lot of spiritual maturity to overcome the temptations to be worldly. And at that point in my life, I was just not fit to do it. So I very much became an atheist. Entirely, I'm not one of these people who's like, wait, technically I'm an agnostic, but I was an atheist. Like, and I had no. I went through a brief period of kind of hostility to religion, but very brief. After that, I looked at religion as being just kind of an aspect of the world that you could study. And interestingly enough, I'm not going to say that, in all bad things, including my atheism, there was, you do see the grace of God, like kind of appearing in ways that maybe it wouldn't happen if I had gone a different path. And that actually encouraged me during this period. I really got into studying like kind of early church stuff and like the history of even like the Roman Empire and things like that. And, I didn't really think of the Orthodox. My way of thinking of it was just like, well, first I realized, okay, the religion I grew up in, no one had that. That didn't exist. Like, when you hear things like, okay, let's say Constantine the Great, famously, he waited to the end of his life to be baptized, right? Now, that's not an Orthodox practice nowadays, but back in the day, right, a lot of people thought they could kind of, I won't have to confess later on. I'll just wait till the end to be baptized. Now, the church doesn't do that practice, but I bring that up because the theology of baptism, that tells you that baptism is something that makes a spiritual difference. Like it is a sacrament you're undergoing, and your sins are being forgiven in that. So yeah, people in that time were trying to juke that system. They were trying to play around with it. But I bring that up because I'm like, well, as a Baptist, that's not what we believe about that. That and I think in so many cases you read these early disputes in the church, and it's not like there's some pseudo Protestant sect that they're always like that are the heretics, but it's even worse than that for a Protestant. It's more like these people are totally talking about something. They're talking about a religion that's so different from what I grew up with as a Protestant, that I really had this, as you know, as an atheist back then, it was just like, oh, well, I guess it's just changed, you know, things are different. But I definitely realized like what I grew up with was it's very ahistorical, you know, it's not, there are, again, I'm not saying like it's all bad, and I don't, you know, mean any ill to any Protestants who are saying this, but like you're not getting, the way my priest says it is like, Protestants don't have the full deck of cards, you know, like they have some of the cards, they understand some things, but when they don't have the right cards, sometimes they'll replace it with the things they want, or you know, political or kind of expediencies. So for the longest time, that's when I was basically like an atheist, and that was my mindset, you know.
Wow. So, as an atheist, what compelled you to read the early church fathers? You were just interested in like understanding all kind of religions, and you start to see kind of a.
I think, well, I will say this by itself is not going to make me Orthodox, because I was still under that idea that like, well, I guess this doesn't exist anymore. You know, historical Christianity and Protestants intuitively all believe this. They kind of believe, there's the early church disappeared, right? And the Protestant idea is there's this thing called the Bible, and we're using the Bible to reconstruct this society that no longer exists, right? I actually remember my mother, when I was a really little kid, you know, I was at VBS or some kind of church thing. And afterwards, I asked my mother, I'm kind of curious, like, you know, we have the Bible, we have such like strong, you know, we hold it at such high esteem. And I was curious about it. I was like, Mom, you know, where did the Bible come from? And, you know, bless her heart, I mean, this is just such a beautiful, it's an innocent reaction, but she thought for a second. She's like, you know, I think we found it in the ground one day. Like we uncovered it, you know. And in her defense at the time, I think she's thinking about like the Dead Sea Scrolls or something like that. But that is such a perfect illustration of what you grow up kind of believing if you're a Protestant. You just have this idea that the church is something we're creating right now. We're reading it from a document. It's not a living, breathing historical society. And that's also why a lot of Protestants will do things like, you know, let's say the Shroud of Turin, okay, which is one of the most, honestly, the scientific evidence behind the Shroud of Turin being the actual burial cloth of Christ is so wildly compelling, like when you really look into it. I mean, don't read Wikipedia because they're going to be against it, but, you know, whatever. If you really look into it, it's I don't know, it's amazing. But Protestants have a tendency to, whenever they see something like that, they almost want to like deny it. They want to deny that there are relics. They want to deny that there are kind of historical miracles. They want to deny, and it's weird because they get in the same boat as atheists, unfortunately. And I think where that comes from is implicitly they do have this idea that the religion is, I mean, there is no historical Christianity that's still around. We are just discovering it. We're reading it from this book. And I think that was, I mean, that's wrong, you know, like, and one of the best evidences, I mean, the Orthodox Church has preserved so much very detailed information in the lives of the saints and all this kind of stuff for our instruction. I mean, we're not like necessarily groping around in the dark. We might be in our own souls when we're trying to overcome passions and stuff like this, but the church has given us so much, and it's what I said. My priest says, like, if you don't have that, you don't have the full deck of cards. You just don't. If people attain, and there are some people who are Protestants or any other religion who obtain a admirable level of morality or a kind of saintliness, but it would be so much, you know, it would be so much better if they had, you know, everything they really need.
Yeah, I think both of those groups, atheists and Protestants, kind of have this core belief of like deconstruction. With the Protestants, we got to get rid of all the traditions of men, but they end up deconstructing the entire faith because, you know, Orthodoxy, Christianity is based on tradition.
Yeah.
The Bible
Yeah.
itself is a part of tradition. You know, you start
Yeah.
deconstructing the liturgy, but this is something that has been passed down that isn't in,
Right.
it isn't given in the Bible alone. And then the atheists
Yeah.
just take that one step further. If you're going to deconstruct everything about Christianity, why can't we just deconstruct the Bible? And they
Yeah.
end up not actually constructing everything. It's just trying to make like a lowest common denominator belief, and it's
Yeah.
it's ultimately
And if you
missing.
look,
Yeah.
if you look historically or cladistically, kind of at the history of the church, like where does like this kind of liberalized religion come from? I mean, it comes from, I mean, there's a generation of, you know, Protestants, let's say in Germany,
Yeah.
you know, Martin Luther, who already is starting to question, weirdly enough, scripture, right?
Yeah.
It was Martin Luther didn't take books out of the Bible, but he demoted what they now call the Apocrypha, right? Because for theological reasons and for other reasons. And the next generation of German, scholarship went even further into deconstructing the text of the Bible. And German higher criticism is very much, it comes from that Protestant Reformation. It's just an issue of where are you going to draw the line of when do you cease being a Protestant and when do you just become an atheist, you know?
Yeah.
And so like I even know of, you know, some Protestants, unfortunately, who will go even further. They'll say, well, look, there's some manuscripts that don't have the end of the Gospel of Mark in it, so we shouldn't have that in our Bible. It's like, well, the church has always had it. Like even, I mean, and that is a good illustration of the difference of how they look at scripture versus how the church looks at it. Let's say, for example, the Apostle Mark didn't write the very end portion of the Gospel of Mark. Maybe one of his assistants, someone else wrote it a generation later. Either way, the church treats it as the Gospel of Mark. Okay. If someone else wrote that, it's not, for a Protestant, that's a big problem. Because again, you have this idea the Bible or either came down from the sky or you dug it out of the ground and it's just by itself, you just know. But the reality is that, like, we can trust the Bible because we know, I mean, it came from this community of the church, which is so uniform Catholic, you know, in its belief and in its practice. And that's the thing that is really, honestly, like one of the things that blew my mind when I was like looking into Orthodoxy is just like you in America, you can go to, you know, again, let's talk about Baptists because I have that background. You can go to a Baptist church and then one down the road, and you're going to see they're doing entirely different things for their services. I mean, they're going to have songs and then preaching, but what those songs are, what they're about, what the preaching is about, you might have different theology in that. They're going to be totally different. But it was wild for me when I was becoming Orthodox to realize, okay, so the church in Russia and, you know, Greece and Georgia and all of Eastern Europe, they are so much on the same page. And even, you know, non-Chalcedonian churches and that other churches that are not in communion with the wider Orthodox Church, they still have this, there's more similarity between them than there are any two given Baptist churches, you know, and that should tell you there's something going on here. There is something, even if, I mean, there's some sense in which people are being united by a tradition and they're guided in a way that you can really tell when there's a significant divergence, you know. And that was wild to me. And that was because, again, your mindset is, it's very me-centered. You don't think of it that way, but as a Protestant, you know, you just kind of open the book and say what you think it's about, you know. And I think it's important. I'm sorry if I'm rambling a little bit, but I do want to say something. I don't want to, like, I apologize if I'm saying anything too hard against heterodox people, Protestants, whatever. And I do want to clarify the important thing ultimately with heterodox Christians is not that they don't have like a spreadsheet of beliefs and they've checked the wrong answers. You know, I think the issue is really those beliefs that might be wrong. They cause sin. You know, it's not them in themselves. If an innocent person innocently misunderstands something, that's one thing. But I think the issue is, you know, when you have a theology that's based on individual people reading the Bible and interpreting it for themselves, and that has no concept of, you know, a kind of apostolic succession and, you know, authority in the church. Like there's no, I am, you know, in many Protestant sects, like it ends up being that everyone is in a spiritual democracy, right? Everyone is equally entitled. And that's one of the reasons you have this kind of wildness. And worse, like there's you have a temptation to be kind of arrogant. And I think a lot of people who even convert to Orthodoxy still kind of have an issue with, oh, look at this person, he's heterodox, therefore he's just bad. In reality, we have to realize that like these, erroneous beliefs or bad theology or whatever, it's harmful because it harms people and it harms the life that they live. And it's a threat. Heresies are damnable, not because, again, you check the wrong box, but because it can affect how you process the entire world. And that really is, I think, a lot of the stuff that I had to deal with, growing up, and anyway.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And I've struggled with that. And I think people who convert to Orthodoxy struggle with that because it's such a richness of truth, and it's just like a fire hose, and you want to share it with everyone. And you can go too far in when interacting with heterodox that you maybe don't do it with love. So finding that balance of like, giving the truth in love is what we're all called to do, and not letting pride or.
Yeah, I think most times I can speak for myself. I think there's a tendency to look at someone and be like, oh, look, and see your old self in him, and you want to condemn him for that reason, right? And that not only are you condemning someone that's wrong, but you're also holding on to your own kind of sin, and that's where a lot of that like, for example, when I see a Muslim, I was never a Muslim. I never interacted with them. I don't really have strong, reactions against them. But again, when there's something I grew up with, I'm like, oh, how could you possibly do that? Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And that's just the wrong way to look at it. And I think I'm reminded, actually, my priest, it's slightly different, but I think it's analogous. He was talking about, I'm gonna not remember the exact things, but he was talking about some monks in a monastery, and one of the monks who, in a moment of pride, he made some comment like, I haven't eaten meat in 15 years, right? And the abbot says something to him saying, listen, you should have been eating meat for all these 15 years because your pride in that instant has totally annulled all of your fasting. It would have been better if you were just not fasting. And I think in the same way, if you are Orthodox, like, it's one thing to, again, have the right beliefs, but if you don't have Christ-like humility, you're not Orthodox. Like, for all the right boxes you check, for all the transformation, for all the lifestyle change you go through, if you're arrogant about it, you've lost everything. You're not like Christ, and he's not, when he interacts with people, let's say like the Samaritan woman who, they were a syncretic sect. They were partially pagans. He doesn't say that she's not wrong. But at the same time, that's not how he approaches her. He doesn't approach her out of arrogance or condemnation. And ultimately that's the model for how we need to be. And a lot of times as well, the first time I want to give, the first time I ever went to an Orthodox church, actually, which I'll give the explanation of that. I was talking about Orthodoxy for a while on my channel. I was like the last person to actually convert. Okay. Just to be clear. Like, there are people, and this is for us to think about, there were people on my channel who I would talk about Orthodoxy in a live stream. And I know that there's at least one I remember who was emailing me before I ever went to a church. He went to a church, became a catechumen, and was baptized. And he was like, hey, thanks, Luke, for telling me about Orthodoxy. And it's like, man, I'm really slow. And that, again, it's important for people like me and you to remember, like, how easy it is to influence people for good or for ill. It's dangerous. That's one of the reasons I haven't put up videos on my channel recently, because I don't know if I have, a lot of my videos have been giving people advice, right? And I want to be very careful with that. Not to say I'm not going to do it, but I want people to, I feel like I have to put like asterisks about, everything. But either way, I'm sorry, I've opened a lot of things I want to talk about, and I'm still finishing. The first time I went to an Orthodox church, actually, there's a guy who was watching one of my live streams in West Virginia, which is not close to where I live. Okay. He was in West Virginia. He was at, what is it? Christ the Savior. Yeah. I think it's Christ the Savior in Wayne, West Virginia. Right. Father Jonah is there. And he asked Father Jonah to invite me over, and I came for Holy Week, and it was an amazing experience. It's right under Holy Trinity, or Holy Cross, the monastery in West Virginia. Wonderful experience. had a great time there. But when I first talked to Father Jonah, he said this thing. He was like, "Whoa, okay, you seem like really you want to become Orthodox. Hey, just remember, it might happen now. God might not open the path for you to become Orthodox for 10 more years." And that was something like really, that's weird, because if you grow up as a Protestant, you're like, oh, come down the aisle, come on, accept Jesus right now. It's a very different mindset, and the faith of that is really surprising. The idea that like you don't necessarily have to rush something if your heart is in the right place. That is, sometimes you have to rush because God wants you to rush, but that mindset, it was just very new to me, and I appreciated it a lot. And I constantly find when I interact with priests who have been Orthodox either their whole life or most of their life, for decades, it really is I don't know, I've been exposed to something totally new, a mindset. Like, I'm still as red pilled as I might think I am. There's so many things that I still, I don't know, like I'm not there yet,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, orthodoxy is a spiritual gold mine. It humbles us, just like the depth of everything. But I want to ask a question about, earlier when you were kind of in this atheist agnostic phase, did you start to believe in God, or did you start to when you were looking into like Christianity, did you even know orthodoxy was a thing, and discerning between like Catholicism, or like what was that like starting to believe in God again?
I think probably my first reflex was actually like similar to what I said before. There is, there's belief and there's also practice.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the first thing that came to my head is that, well, maybe religion is wrong in belief, as still being an atheist,
Mm-hmm.
but maybe they're right in practice.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I should drop by a church. Maybe I should be socially connected or something like that.
Yeah.
That was step number one. And although that's still that can be dangerous, right? Because you don't, people who are not, no, that's not the same thing as going to a church with a clean heart and faith. But
Mm-hmm.
it was step number one.
Yeah.
And I think I think that step, and with a little bit of prayer, I think it very much opened, if you don't have faith, pray for faith. You know what I mean? That's what people say so often. Yeah. And I think what gradually happened is in my academic work, weirdly enough, the possibility of God became a possibility. I think I was looking over at the University of Arizona, which is where I was. I was doing a degree in linguistics or a PhD in linguistics or whatever. But they have a bunch of people there who do research on consciousness, which is, there's no, I will say there's no scientific explanation of consciousness, but I'll go further and I'll say it's impossible for there to be a scientific explanation of consciousness. It is literally something right in our face at all times that is non-material. And whatever complex material interactions can happen in the universe, you can create a complex computer, you can even create a complex philosophical zombie, but consciousness is just something that is not matter. It just, I want to say I wrote a blog post on this a little bit ago, but so that kind of opened me to the possibility. And obviously in Orthodoxy, we have this concept of nous, right? Which is really, in a way, it's consciousness, and it's something that is very tied in with the concept of God. And, the Trinity actually, there's a full theology, which is way actually beyond my level, even at this point, as a recent convert, that goes into the relationship between, all these kind of core aspects of the universe. But either way, I started reading early, I just started reading weird stuff like neoclassical, or not neoclassical, like late post-classical philosophy, a little bit Hermetic stuff. A lot of that stuff is like questionable because it's tied to the occult. I was never in it for that reason, and no one should be. But it did open me to the possibility of, these people are speaking within a mindset that is similar to the modern mindset, but at the same place, it almost like assumes God. It's part of their way of looking at the universe. And I think what I realized is like my entire way of looking at the materialist mindset that all of us automatically get in our society, including sometimes if we're Orthodox or definitely if you're Protestant or something like that. It almost presupposes a kind of atheism. It presupposes an atheism, and if you believe in God, you just tack God onto that in some way. And that is so different from how people in history looked at things. And more than that, there is this ultimate sense in which, there's a sense in which some deistic kind of person, or let's not say deistic, like atheists, of course, are dealing with a philosophical problem when they're talking about the creation of the universe and where things came from. And the difference between raw atheism and raw theism is almost like what they think God's personal pronoun is, right? Do you refer to God as a he or an it? And that was kind of step number one. So I think what happened is there were a bunch of little cracks in the facade. There were a bunch of cracks in the matrix for me, where it's like, okay, I see my worldview isn't necessarily sufficient. I mean, it kept me content for a decade, but it wasn't necessarily sufficient to deal with the edge cases, which are really not edge cases. They're really something fundamental to how the universe works, right? That I've just gotten used to making reasons. Oh, we'll explain it someday, So that started happening, and at the same time, I think more importantly, God was putting me in a part in my life where I was being extremely humbled. Without my will, terrible things were happening to me, partially because of my own arrogance, honestly. But I was in a position when I was around 25 or so, I basically lost everything I'd built up, everything, my academic career, all this kind of stuff. And it was partially my own arrogance, but also is partially the evil state of the world. It's almost like me and the evil world were conspiring, but it all worked out for the best because I had to, I basically had the choice of, I got to get out of this place. Part of me was realizing I'll never be happy here. It's like a very evil system, but at the same time, I was very motivated by my own will. And after that, when I moved away from the university, I was just, and this is, I guess, around the time I started my YouTube channel. I started like very much reevaluating things. That's when I actually started going to church seriously as someone who actually believes, or is at least open to belief. And in the initial period, I very much was gravitated to Catholicism for a very superficial reason, because like I know Latin really well, and I kind of know Greek. I can read the Greek scriptures a little bit, but my Latin is really good, and so I had this opportunity to read a bunch of scholastic stuff, Roger Bacon and Aquinas and stuff like that. But that was kind of a bridge to get into Orthodoxy accidentally. Also because it's kind of like a halfway between the modern mindset and the Orthodox mindset. But so that's kind of how things happened in my case. But you have something to say? Sorry.
Yeah. Was there any like transitionary figures besides just reading like theologians in Catholicism? Because we have some overlap in the the church fathers with Catholicism and Orthodoxy. I noticed. Right. I heard that you mentioned like Dr. Michael Heiser in one of your streams. Yeah. So was there like important figures like that helped you?
Weirdly enough, no. Like, I don't know. Michael Heiser is interesting. I mean, obviously, he was never Orthodox. He doesn't. He just really looked into, and this happens in a lot of cases. You look at Michael Heiser. I think also there's N.T. Wright, who actually is an Anglican bishop. He doesn't know that much about Orthodoxy, but he's very close accidentally to being Orthodox.
Yeah.
Most of his scholarship is basically like, why Protestants were wrong in the Reformation. Like, why were they wrong they were actually wrong about Paul. They've been reading Paul wrong for 500 years. Here's this guy who's a Protestant saying this kind of stuff. Yeah. Either way, I can't think of any in particular. Heiser, I started reading after I would self-describe as Christian. And maybe I was already looking at Orthodoxy. Honestly, I think part of it was just what I said earlier, where I realized like, okay, outside of the West, outside of Protestantism and the Roman Catholic Church, everyone else is kind of on the same page. And that in itself is kind of a testimony. So in a way, it was by process of elimination. I was like, okay, well, I know what I grew up with. I know there are issues in that. The Roman Catholic Church, I'm seeing a lot of good things in Roman Catholicism, but like there's something where historically things have gone really weird, and that's all that I can say. And things have really changed in Catholicism. Unfortunately, you know, I still interact with a lot of, I have, you know, Catholic friends and stuff like that. But, you know, I think there is something that's very lost there, unfortunately. So that's kind of how I ended up. And there's a long time of me just being kind of, I'm theologically Orthodox, but where I live, there are just no, or at the time, there were just no churches around where I was. So it almost became like I'd have to, I thought I'd have to drive like 2 hours or so. And I had this interaction. I'll publish it. I'll tell you. Do you know Roosh V?
Oh yeah. He was popular convert.
Yeah. Roosh V. You know, he's a manosphere guy back in the day who repented of his sins basically and became very Orthodox. You know, he really turned his life around, and you know, he's disappeared from the internet. I've heard people who know where he is and stuff like that, but you know, he's disappeared from the internet. And I think it's very admirable, honestly. But there's one point where I had emailed him about something. I forget exactly. And I said this thing about, oh, you know, I'm thinking about, you know, I'm very set on becoming Orthodox. There's just there's no church anywhere around me. And he sent me back an email that it wasn't harsh, but he kind of scolded me. He's like, if there's a church 4 hours away, you should be driving. That's basically what he said. He's like, in the last days, even having that is a blessing. And at the time, I'm like, I know he's right. Like, I know this man is right. And eventually, you know, once again, Father Jonah invited me to his parish, which I drove all the way to West Virginia for that. He let me stay at his house. By the way, he's if you know the site, Damascene Gallery that makes icons, that's actually his business. Oh, cool. I've been in his workshop. It's very nice. Wow. So he and he actually gave me my first icons, which there's a story with that as well that he doesn't even know, but I'll tell him next time I see him. Either way, what was I going to say? So at that point, I basically just had to kind of swallow my laziness and, you know, start driving to church. And I think, you know, for a while, I'd still pop into a Protestant church. But I think there came a point where I was like, listen, every day I don't go to an Orthodox church, it's a waste, absolute waste. You know, even if I'm not communing, even if I'm not a catechumen yet. So I started going to the Greek church in Tallahassee, which is Holy Mother of God. I went there for a bit, but eventually there's the church I go to now. I'll go ahead and dox the church I go to. Not just that, I had on the way here, I actually had a phone call with my baptismal sponsor. And we were talking about other things, but he's like, "Oh, you're going to talk to Kyle? Give our parish a shout out." So I'm going to give them a shout out. So I now go in Greenville, Florida. I go to St. Andrews there, which is a very small mission parish. I say very small, but it's exploding in the number of people we have. That's usually where I go. I do travel a lot. I go to different places, but you know, so that's where I was baptized. And so it's right kind of at the nexus of like Florida. Like we have some people who are in like Valdosta, Georgia, who go. Some people in Alabama, a lot from like Tallahassee and stuff. So I ended up finding them. And yeah, again, that's where I was baptized, and that's where I've been since. Although my baptism, for those people who don't know, it's been very recent. I guess it was at the beginning of this year. Okay, so again, I was like the last person to convert. When I went to Europe, the last video on my YouTube channel is about me going to Europe, going to Greece, Montenegro. I went to a lot of great places. I went to St. Nectarios's monastery, but like I wasn't baptized then. I couldn't, you know what I mean? I can't even commune. But it was still a great experience. But anyway, so sorry, I haven't been on the internet so long. I think I'm just like putting everything out.
No, it's good. A lot of people have been waiting for this. Like, what's going on? Like it's over a year. But I understand that that stress, because you know all your videos were giving advice, and that's really good advice. And I know people who still watch them. You know, I still watch the old live streams and things like that. But it is it's a big responsibility. You know, giving other people advice. And so has that been just kind of like a struggle? Is like, you know, where do I go from here, since you're like reevaluating a lot of things?
Yeah. I think it's not necessarily, there are things that I reevaluate, but I think a lot of it is, even if it sounds great to me, I'm just not sure.
Yeah.
because, you know, I'm new to the concept of spiritual authority, right? Again, as a Protestant, you don't necessarily have that.
Yeah.
But here, you always, I mean, you know, a friend I have, people watching may know, Luther, who has Transfigured Life, you know, the YouTube channel.
Yeah.
Me and him have met, you know, and I like that he always does a video pretty much nearly always with a priest, you know,
Yeah.
and I assume that you at least get an okay to do kind of
I
stuff
do.
like this. And so I think it's very, I just want to be caught. Like, I've even talked to my priest about this already. Like, you know, he's fine with me, you know, doing videos and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But like, I just want to be kind of cautious about it. Like, I just
Definitely.
don't know. I don't want to like necessarily put, I also don't want it to be, I guess one thing I'm worried about is, for some people, I want to make sure that like them converting is not like a fad, you know.
Yes.
I have a friend who goes to a parish, and the priest there, it's an Antiochian parish actually, and the priest there says, if you have like an MDiv, if you're like a theology person, you're gonna have to be a catechumen a whole lot longer, because like you want to make sure, you got to make sure this guy has left aside all the issues they have, and all also that they're not following a fad, and that their conversion is genuine.
Yeah.
And you know, I kind of feel like I just want to be careful, you know, that's all it is. But yeah, that's part of it. But I'm not against like giving it. I mean, when I talk to people in the parish, you know, I'll happily give my personal advice, or whenever it's needed. But you know, you just got to watch I have to watch my words, you know.
Yeah.
Everyone.
Definitely. Because it's a big thing when you're converting to not, it's one thing to like believe the right things, but actually acquiring, you know, we hear Orthodox phronema, that Orthodox worldview, like living like Christ, having that Christ-like humility, like you were talking about. It just takes time, and it takes going to church, and I mean, even outside of church, of like really living orthodoxy out daily, which is, it's the hardest part. It's easy to like believe the right things, but to, you know, live that daily is really difficult.
And people in America are this. I mean, it's great. It's great how many people are converting. It's such a blessing. It's such a blessing to see people. The parish I go to used to be in a doctor's office. They'd have to set up every weekend, you know, in a doctor's office waiting room. But we've grown so much, and I love that, and thank God for that. But at the same time, we need to start thinking about the next generation, you know, because so many things like, are Orthodox people ready in America, which is really a very demonic country, you know, just in terms of the things you get exposed to, and you really have to do the bare minimum. You have to fight against the grain in a way, unfortunately. And all of us, so I think it remains to be seen, and, you know, may God's grace like be with us. But I think it's going to be another struggle when I mean, I see that you recently got married, and that's, you know, thanks be to God for that. Or are you engaged, or did you already get married?
I got married a few months ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
Either way, that's fantastic. So the next struggle for, you know, everyone in that situation, as great as that is like, how am I going to raise, like, how can I raise children that don't have the baggage that I have, you know, the cultural baggage, all the sins that we've been exposed to, you know, how do I protect my children from that? And, you know, I think even there's something I think about, you know, I remember having this conversation, you know, if children, I think, if you're a Protestant, let's say, or any, it doesn't matter what religion you are, or let's not even talk about religions. Let's talk about your own sins. You know, when you're praying, I mean, let's say you have a prayer to the Virgin Mary, you know, if you have a Protestant background, you might have some little nag in the back of your head that says, oh, well, you're not supposed to do this, you know, and that's an evil thing that you've grown up with, you know, that you kind of have to get over with. And the important thing when it comes to setting the next generation right, we don't want to raise our children like that. We don't want them to have little theological arguments in their head. We want them to be able to live and breathe and be, you know, the Christians they're supposed to be, and not like kind of, you know, and that's a difficult thing in a country where, you know, we just don't have that. And more than that, I think very important. I don't know if you want to go into I know in our original messages, if you want to go into more like lifestyle stuff, but I think this is where it might be relevant, because the
Yeah.
reality is, like, and I'll just go ahead and I'll puke out what I want to say right now.
Let's hear
And
it.
that is, I think it's really important, like Americans who are converting, who are becoming, Christian in the truest sense of the word, they have to realize they're going to be discarding a lot about their lifestyle.
Yes.
The suburban 9 to 5 lifestyle is nearly entirely incompatible, not just with human life in general, but as it happens, the Orthodox faith, right? I mean, imagine living in a traditional Orthodox country where, you work leisurely throughout the day, and at a set time of day, everything closes down and people have the option to walk to church, to go to the 9th hour or something like that. You can just walk, and just hear a prayer, and that's part of your life. There's a daily breathing of everything you do in your life that is tied into the church. And that's something we don't have now. And what we need in a way to establish is people need to be physically not just close to each other, but they need to be physically next to each other. We need to have a place where we can walk to church and walk to our community members and stuff like this. And that is actually normal life in a way. But to attain that, we do have to, everyone has to make sacrifices, right? I remember I was thinking earlier today, the story of the rich young ruler, right? Where the rich young ruler comes to Christ and he says, "What do I have to do to be saved?" And he said, "Easy, just throw away everything, give it to the poor, follow me," right? And the rich young ruler, he cries and he leaves. And I'm much more lucky than the rich young ruler. I think I mentioned to you, because again, when I was 25 and I quote unquote lost everything that I was building up in my life, I didn't have a choice. It just happened. And it would be a blessing. What a blessing it would be for the rich young ruler if God had just taken away all of his temptations. That's great. It sounds bad, but it sounds great. Or it really is great. And that's the mindset you kind of have to have. Like, I think people should have, I've always been a proponent of like self-sufficiency and independence and all that kind of stuff before I became Orthodox. But now it seems like even more dire, because you really only want to have your toes in the world, just one of your toes if you need it. I got to make a little bit of money, but I'm ready to leave that at any moment. That I think is the mindset that is very important, and that applies to me as well, because I have property and I live in a place, and if push comes to shove and I have to move and sell everything, I have to be ready to do that. And so it's just something, and that is like the spiritual struggle that all of us kind of deal with, where mostly the world, it doesn't just have evil in it. It has something even worse. It has distractions. It has like good things that aren't quite as good. It pulls your noose, it pulls your attention into stuff on the internet, stuff on, which by all means, if you're watching this because you're, just wasting time or whatever, don't watch it, turn off. There is that kind of temptation all of us have all the time, with just all of the distractions that are in front of us, and the comfort, like modern life. The main sin of America is probably just the love of comfort. The love of, I just don't want to be bothered with this. I just want to keep doing what I'm doing. So.
Yeah, that's actually the next question that I wanted to talk about, is that when I started to become Christian, I started to get really into like minimalism and living below my means. Like, I don't need a bunch of stuff to be happy, and consumerism is really destructive to me. I bought a lot of random stuff. Like, I bought like a lot of manga, and I'm like, why did I just buy like 50 of
Whoa, cringe.
Yeah, it's very cringy, and it's also like your money is your time. So why am I wasting it in buying a consumer good when you could buy something like land or something that's going to actually help you be free? And that's one thing I appreciated about a lot of your videos, is talking. I mean, that's how I actually first found it. It was like, how to not be a wagey anymore, and like, go live in the country. And you talk about like the ThinkPad and the ThinkPad of cards, the Lexus, and credit card churning, like all of these ways where the money that you do have is going to go further, and living below your means, because you really don't need that much to be really happy.
Yeah.
If you have God, if you have your community, like focus your time on living below your means and investing in things that are actually going to make you free. So my question
Yeah.
is, did you always have that mindset of kind of like living below your means, or did that kind of start when you well, I guess you lost everything, so
Yeah.
you
Well, I think even before that, I
yeah.
kind of had the mindset of I think it started as a personal disposition when I was
Mhm.
younger. I think I wrote in a blog post like millennials are more or less divided in two categories. You have like the constant like spenders who are just blowing money everywhere. They're getting coffees all the time, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
And then you have maybe a smaller segment of them who's like, let's see, can I live in a 10 by 20 box for the rest of my life? And that's kind of how I was, from the beginning. Like, there's a point where when I was 18, I'm like, okay, I have a car. Could I live in this car if I need to?
Yeah.
Like how? And so that kind of is my mindset, and
Mhm.
it can be good or bad. Like, there's a sense in which it can be like a vice,
Mhm.
because it becomes like almost in a way. I feel sometimes. Let's say you mentioned like credit card churning and stuff like that,
Yeah.
which I'm a proponent of whatever you can to not invest in the world more. But you don't. I realize that at some point there's sometimes like a lot of people are greedy for money. It's almost like I'm greedy for exploiting things, or like I
Yeah.
feel like there's something vicious about it, like it's a vice. So you have to, but I do think the goal in general is, as I said, like living in a close community of people physically next to each other,
Yeah.
where the normal ins and outs of life you just don't need. Like, you don't need to drive 20 minutes to the store to get something for $20
Mhm.
to do something basic anymore.
Yeah.
And you look at, I mean, a great example. There are many good examples of people who live in a traditional lifestyle. In the Orthodox world, so in America we have the Amish, right? In the
Yeah.
Orthodox world, it's kind of the old believers. A lot of them live more or less like Amish people.
Yeah.
They wear older clothing and they live in communities. But one thing I think, just reading about a community like that, let's say the Amish, like if
Mhm.
an Amish person wants a house, what happens? They all get together over a weekend. They build a house.
Mhm.
After the weekend, done. The house is built. Okay.
Yeah.
There's no debt. There's no like, unnecessary spending. All the labor is just done. And everyone knows how to do it because they've done it a million times. You get a free house and you participate in building everyone else's houses. And
Okay.
that's not just an Amish quirk. I was actually reading a historical document from the county I live in from the 1800s, and they're actually talking about these house rates. I mean, everyone used to do this.
Yeah.
Everyone used to do that. This is not just some Amish weird thing.
Mhm.
This is just human life, and we've lost it. We've totally lost it, or even more than that. I think it's really important. Like, any property you buy should really ideally be in your family for as long as it can be. Like,
Yeah.
um, if you have property, if you have 5 acres or something like that, expect to build all your kids' houses there. You know what I mean? That's,
Mhm.
I think, the mindset we have to have.
Yeah.
And it's very different, but it's so much better. And it's so much like, a lot of the pain in the modern world is self-imposed.
Yeah.
It is, we choose to live this painful and also sinful life. And ultimately sin isn't fun. Like, sin isn't joyful.
Mhm.
There might be some fleeting enjoyment, but like, I think that if anything, in most cases, people need to be more true to what they kind of know is the right thing to do,
Yeah.
or the thing that's going to, I don't know, like, there's a lot of, it's like what I said earlier. Growing up as a young Protestant, there were a lot of things I grew up with where I'm kind of like, this is kind of weird that we do this.
Mhm.
Isn't this, I don't know, isn't this like weird VBS stuff where we're dancing and like goofing around? There's all these light colors. Is this really the appropriate way to worship God? You kind of
Mhm.
have this like reaction that's very natural,
Mhm.
and it doesn't just apply to faith. It applies to everything in life. Like,
Yeah.
if the fact that, I mean, let's say schooling, I'm a big proponent of what's called unschooling, which is really just like, don't send your kids to school. Let them learn in the natural way. If they have intellectual aspirations, they will naturally run across those. If they don't, they don't need a massive formal education.
Mhm.
And that's one thing where schooling is a great example, where it's so unnatural. You take these kids, You put them in a classroom for 8 hours a day. They don't have, and guess what? They don't behave because it's evil what you're doing in
Yeah.
essence. And oh well, we'll just give them Ritalin. We'll give them drugs if they, not, you know,
Yeah.
so every like, it's not just the stimulus is bad, but the response to the stimulus is bad, and like it just gets worse and worse. And so
Yeah.
that's why it's important, as I said, if you're going to be in the world, you know, and I struggle with this as well, but if you're going to be in the world, just dip your toes a little bit if you need something, but the rest you should be able to leave at any point, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, what's really sad is when someone is 10 years into a career and they just don't feel like they can get out of it. That's sad. I mean, that is slavery. It really is slavery, and it's also being a slave to the world, you know, in a bad sense, the world, you know.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think there's a huge problem with schooling. It doesn't actually teach people skills. Like they learn all these facts that aren't actually like applicable to their life. And I think there's there's a lot of truth in what you said about, you know, people who have aptitude are naturally gonna search out these things. Like I know lots of people who are homeschooled and they're, you know, very high achievers because, you know, you don't need to sit in a classroom for, you know, 8 hours a day. And, you know, especially with what they're teaching nowadays, it's just completely
Yeah.
unproductive, and it's actually destructive to children. And it's all meant to just socialize them, not actually make them free, independent people. And I think that's the whole problem with the system is they want to disconnect people from the basic tasks that humans used to do, like, you know, food collection, building a house. Like the average person in high school isn't going to be able to think, oh, I can build a house because there's all these regulations and you have to do, you have to use all these like tools and stuff like that. But it really, if you're building something simpler, like the Amish or some of these like traditional communities, it doesn't need to be that complicated. We've just overcomplicated it so much. And, you know, houses are so big now. They're like, you know, they make, you know, the square footage, it just keeps increasing. Of course, if you're making like a huge house, it's gonna take a lot of skilled labor. But I think really getting back to, I think really the core of it is individualism, or like toxic individualism versus some form of collectivism. Is that, especially Orthodox Christians in America, is we should see ourselves as a collective on the local level, because those are the people that are going to be impacting your life the most, and getting really connected with them. Keeping wealth within your communities, keeping your toes, you know, as little in the world as possible, because we don't want to be like the world. Don't want to. I mean, because the world inflames our passions and distracts us, really.
Yeah, that's and I think the thing, again, like the hard thing for me or anyone else, is we have to be willing to kind of make sacrifices to get to that point.
Yeah.
And once we're there, it becomes a lot easier. It becomes easier as you go on. You know, it's not like I remember one of my old videos that, I don't know if it was one of my more popular ones, but I think it was one of the more impactful ones in terms of like the responses I got, or emails, where I'm like, will you ever stand up for yourself, or something like that?
Yeah.
Where it was talking, it wasn't really about the can you say that on the, you know, the thing a couple years ago? It's that band. I don't know.
Stabbing.
Can we talk about the shot? Either way, I assume all that. So it's all be memory hold. So I can talk about the vaccines, whatever. So the COVID vaccines or whatever, which I didn't really talk about those. But what annoyed me, why I did that video, is like these guys who are like, I don't want to get the vaccine, but I'm going to give in because I just have to. And I think my point in that video is like, if you're going to give in now, that's just giving them license next time for the next thing. You're going to have to give into that. You're going to have another struggle. Whereas if you make the stand now, it's actually going to be easier, you know? Yeah. And that's kind of how I look at it. Like, I'm glad that I actually moved when I did. You know, I'm glad that I like lost everything when I was 25 instead of when I was 30. That would have been a lot harder. And actually, property's a lot more expensive, you know? So it would have been a mess.
Yeah. And so, yeah, all these things in the world, like I remember seeing your videos about modern, you know, TV and movies, and how it really feeds into this cycle. and there's propaganda on every level, from the education system and ads, TV, movies, and I think that's why we're seeing such a growth in like alternative entertainment, alternative education. But
Yeah.
yeah, how
Well,
would
I
you?
don't even believe in the alternatives.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
so what's an issue to me is
mhm,
when people, they don't like, oh, well, I don't like this TV show, or I don't like the news, so
yeah,
I'm going to make my own news. And in reality, like all of that kind of stuff is really a spiritual distraction. I think even, um, I think even being too invested in things like politics or something like that
yeah,
can really just, I don't know, cover your spiritual eye, and
yes,
you read things in the wrong way, and you invest yourself in the wrong things that ultimately you don't have control over. Like that's kind of the I guess the thing about democracy that's really pernicious, that's really kind of evil, is that it's based on a lie that we can control power in the world. That we can control the principalities and power.
mhm,
If anything, it's so wicked because it gets people invested in it because they feel like they can affect things, and that is a spiritual distraction. And that is you get invested in these things that you can't control, and you start rooting for a team. Even if that's not to say everyone's in politics is equal. I'm not saying that or anything,
yeah,
but I'm just saying it's not for us. It's not for us to be invested in it.
mhm,
It's a distraction. Same thing with most of this stuff. Like there is no alternative for, people would often ask me like, hey, Luke, you're into free software. What's a good free software alternative for like Twitter or Reddit or something like that? And it's like, I mean, there are some, but you shouldn't be using them. Like, they,
yeah,
they, just stop. You just close the screen here. Oh, I don't want to do that. It's probably gonna mess something up. But you know,
yeah.
um,
Yeah, because all these things are ultimately meant to sedate us. I really think they're bred in circuses. Is these shouldn't be the thing that define our life, is the TV shows and your job and things like that. It should be the people around you, focusing on them, your local church, and because the people who like hyper obsess about like politics and like things in the world, I mean, on the left and right, I noticed that they're just very doomer and black pilled, and they're like sad about something that was never even in their control in the first place, because
yeah,
they have that illusion that if we just win this election, everything's gonna change. And it's not that, there can be good changes from elections, but it's just your ultimate hope should not be in that. It's like you should be focusing on your own repentance, because that's ultimately
right.
what's going to matter at the final judgment. It's not going to matter, how much you cared about this certain political issue. It's going to be really, were you Christ-like?
Yeah,
Were you humble? And
yeah.
yeah,
And that especially the kind of political. I don't want to talk too much, even
yeah,
indirectly, about politics,
uh-huh.
but like, I think the complexity of the world is so great
Hmm.
that individual humans truly, it's so difficult to actually understand how things are going to be affected by this policy change or the other. There are some things that are very black and white. Okay, abortion's demonic.
Yeah,
Okay, things like that.
yeah,
But even then, when you have the layer of democracy on top, you actually don't know. Okay, well maybe Trump is more likely to do something about abortion, even though he says he's not going to. But you also might get worse stuff in Israel because of him. There's all this kind of stuff going on, and ultimately, I'm just not qualified. I'm not a spirit bearing elder that can see the future and I know
yeah,
exactly how to interact all this kind of stuff. So I think it's very unwise to be emotionally attached to it. Most of all, I'm not going to fault someone who like votes in an election, whatever. I think there's something weird about. I will say, like, I become like kind of wary about participation in that in general. But like, I'm not going to fault someone definitely
mhm,
for voting or something like that. But most important, no matter what you do, is you don't have spiritual distractions when you're living your spiritual life, and you're focused on, you can't beat all the evil in the world.
yeah,
You're not under obligation to do that. You have to beat the evil within yourself. And that's really the struggle. That's a struggle that's very difficult even to do it for yourself. But like, don't bite off more than you can chew, that you have no hope of chewing.
yeah. Exactly. I think that's what living in this modern age and like being hyper connected to everything, it makes you feel like you do have, like you can make a change on these like global things, but it's ultimately just leading you to despair versus just focusing on that is defeat the evil within yourself. Is that's the whole approach of orthodoxy is like if you want to save other people, focus on your own repentance. And that's really
Yeah.
difficult is confronting
Yeah.
your own sins every single day.
Yeah.
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 So my final question for you is, what advice would you give to young men in general? Like a young man who's in high school. I've got a lot of, young Zoomers watching my channel. So is there any overall advice that you would give of like how to, succeed in life?
I can say a couple things. I'll give the
Yeah.
precursor of again, be careful about my advice
Yeah.
because I'm no big authority, but um, I will say there are a couple things I notice. One of the big things. So here's maybe you've never noticed about my channel, but I've never done videos relating anything to girls. Okay, and one of the reasons I do that is because I think modern men just have they're so over invested in women far more than they should be. And that's not me saying, oh, they should all be monks. But I do think that one of the ways I think in the same way that like you don't want to have too much investment in um, a very particular plan for your future,
Mm-hmm.
or you don't want to be too invested in a passion. I think a lot of guys, it's very vicious. It's a very much a vice.
Yeah.
How a lot of what they do, a lot of their self worth comes from women, like that kind of stuff. So I would say a couple things about that. Firstly, um, I think it's important to keep perspective. Firstly, like if you're a young guy, don't worry. Like you have to set a lot of things straight with yourself before you get married or have a successful marriage in the
Yes.
first place. So one thing that I think I may have said on a live stream, but this is a good way of thinking about it. It's like imagine you in your apartment or house or whatever, and knock, knock, knock. Who's at the door? You open it up. It's the girl of your dreams. Okay, are you even ready for that girl?
Yeah.
Are you prepared?
Yeah.
Because honestly, most of the guys who are constantly thinking about girls, they're not. They're nowhere close. And so, if you're a guy, you have a little more leeway with age. Obviously, you can be a little older, and you can still get married. It's not an issue. So I would just say, like, I'm very happy whenever I see a man who's not, or a young man who's like not constantly, I don't know, thirsty for female attention. That's a big relief. And guess what? I truly think it is actually kind of a psyop that men are told that they're supposed to have like all these desire, all these passions for women. And I mean, it's important to remember, like, if you look at other cultures, most cultures in the world will say that, will have the idea that women are inherently more romantic, but also sensual in a way than males naturally. That's pretty much a given assumption in pretty much any culture. But we have this very opposite idea where men are told that, oh, we just need females all the time, and that's just not. So I would say that I think women can be again, and I would say that a lot of men, although they have a lot of improvements to make. I think at the same time, you don't want to be in a position where you just get female attention and you run with you do foolishness.
Yeah.
You don't want to do that. And another thing I would say that's related to that, and again, take my advice with a grain of salt. I'm not a big spiritual authority, and this is not even advice. This is just something for young men to keep in mind. Okay, a lot of people talk about the conversion of a lot of men to the church. A bunch of men coming in. There are a lot of girls coming in now, but like there are a lot of men converting, and there seems to be more men than women in America, right? As it is right now. And a lot of people talk about that as if it's a bad thing. Okay. And I understand that, because a lot of these guys are like what I just said. They're kind of thirsty. They want females in their life. And I will just say, I think it's worth considering that I'm just going to say some of those guys right now, God might intend for them not to be married. We need monks, we need bishops, and I'm not saying that you out there right now are worthy to be something like that, but I think keep that in mind. If you grow up in a Protestant society, you've never even had the category of someone who has a full life that is powerful and impactful, and you even have a lot of the joys of marriage, in having spiritual children and having a huge impact on the world you're in, and even if you're living a life of prayer, I think that's there's so much in that, and you don't have a concept of that. So there's a possibility that a lot of these guys, frankly, should at least consider the alternative, which is a higher calling, right? Those who are called for that is, a higher calling to work as a monastic experience. Like I was talking to a guy, he went to one of the churches I go to sometimes, St. Mary of Egypt in Atlanta. Wonderful. Oh, what a wonderful parish. I don't know. Everyone should go there who's anywhere. What a blessing to be in the Atlanta area. I don't think anyone's ever said that, but to go to that church is truly wonderful. But I remember talking to a guy there who, just as an experiment, as many of them do, he stayed at it's actually a monastery as well. He stayed there for a brief period, contemplated becoming a monk, eventually decided against it. He was tonsured a reader. He was helping them with services and stuff like this. But it gives you a taste of, a fuller Christian life, right? Yeah. And I'll say as well, if you're a young man in that position where you're single or whatever, there's so much for you to accomplish. There's so much advancement for you to make. In the Orthodox Church, obviously, you usually have your prayer book that has morning and evening prayers. I would also consider talking to your priest or someone else about praying hours. I think it's a wonderful thing for people to do. If you have free time at your house, or if you have a little longer lunch break, you can pray an hour. You can learn how to do that, and it's a wonderful thing. And I say that because if you're a single man who has a lot of time and you're on the internet too much, there is already a full world of prayer that you can participate in. Yes. And whether you're going to be a monastic or whether you're going to be married, it's going to prepare you for both. And when you get married and you're going to be praying with your wife or your family, you want to have a good habit established. You want to be used to this kind of stuff. So I would say, I would say in general, again, men, whether you're going to be married or a monastic, the things you need to do are basically the same. You need to divest from the sensuality of the world. You are over-invested in women. You are over-invested I think people just need that perspective and contemplate the alternative of monasticism, but don't listen to me and think you're going to be a monk. Listen to someone who is a spiritual authority, get a spiritual father, go to a monastery, say you're interested in it. And I've met many people. There's a convert. Actually, I met at St. Mary of Egypt. He actually was a convert from. I think his parents were like liberal Jews or something. But his conversion was he read a wonderful book that I just read, Brothers Karamazov. I don't know if you've read that.
I've heard of it, yeah,
but
by Dostoevsky.
It's so beautiful. And it's a good book to read, not even necessarily for the plot, but it does have a beautiful plot, but the character, it gives you kind of a viewpoint of, an elder of the Orthodox mindset, if you don't have it, of what it's like to live in an Orthodox society where people bless each other and all this kind of stuff. And either way, this convert I met, he had started reading Brothers Karamazov, got halfway through and just had to throw down the book. And he's like, I have to convert. This is, there's something going on. And he says that he wants to pursue monasticism. And either way, it's a wonderful and fulfilling. And anyway, most people out there who are listening to this, they're probably going to be married. That's probably what God has in mind for them. But I'm just saying, for those of you, those one or two who might, or maybe a lot more than that, I don't know, just consider it, consult a spiritual authority about it. So I would just say, and one more thing, not necessarily about the same topic, but just as advice to young men, I think it's important to, read the scripture readings of the day and read scripture and stuff like that. But I think the best part of the scriptures are the gospels. Okay. And here's a lot of people read the Bible with the wrong mindset, including myself. I would read the Bible, especially if you're a convert, you might read it for argumentative reasons or apologetic reasons. Oh, I'm going to read this passage. Oh, look at this parable. It doesn't work with Protestantism, blah, 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 blah. Arrogant way of looking at things. A helpful way to read the Gospels that I've recently kind of adopted is read the Gospels and assume whenever there's a bad guy, you're the bad guy. You are the Pharisees. You are the, you are the Samaritan woman. You're the woman caught in adultery. You are all of those things. And approach the Christian faith just with humility, and look to authority when it's there. And I think it's hard to go wrong there, because you want to question your own impulses, even the things of you that might be good. Again, as I said, there might be impulses I have that I think are, I really seek independence and stuff like that. There's a good aspect of that, but there can be something evil with that as well. And so just be vigilant. I don't, yeah, is there,
No,
is that, I'm trying to think of something else I should say, but
no, that's perfect. I mean, men need to focus on themselves and become the best version of yourself, especially on that spiritual level. And even, going to a monastery, go make pilgrimages, even if it's just for, a weekend, start with something like that. Just see what it's like at a monastery. Is you're not going to regret it. Whatever your path is, if you're going to be a priest, married, a monk, that time at the monastery is going to be good. They'll have you do some work. You'll get some physical growth, some spiritual growth. It's just going to be good for you.
Yeah. And I think it's just important, like, physically be close to other Orthodox people, even those that are sometimes still figuring things out. But it's important for us to be physically close. Like, we try to do at our parish, we try to do as many little events, even though we're small. Sometimes we'll meet up in the middle of the week at the parish and just have a meal, I think, again, the goal is for us all to be physically next to each other, walking distance. And that should be, now we as in people in America might not be able to achieve that in this next generation. It might be a difficulty, but just don't go forth humbly without arrogance. And, I hope I can do that. I give that advice. I hope I can do it,
And it all starts when you actually go to church. That's why I always promote the Orthodoxy in America church locator, so you can find a local church, get involved there. I mean, the churches all need help. You can be an altar server. You can help in the choir. You can help on the church board. There's so many different things, and even if you just try it out for a while, but and you that's how you get to know people in your local community. Since America is so spread out, like going to that church, you're actually going to meet your neighbors, which is great. But thank you so much. I really enjoyed this interview. I'm glad that we could do it. And if you're open, I would love to do a part 2. If anyone has any questions or topics you want us to cover, just comment them below, and maybe Luke and I can do that in the future. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Yeah.
That sounds like a great idea. I'd love to do something like that, sometime soon. So
yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. God bless.